So this is the new DJI Action 4, and I've been using it over the past month across all sorts of different things to see how well it works, where it works well, and where it needs a little bit of work still. In this video, I'm going to cover four main areas. The first is I'm going to talk about what's new in the camera and whether it's really all that new. The second is I'm going to go through side-by-side footage with the GoPro Hero 11 Black to show you where it does things better and where it does things worse. Then from there, I'm going to talk about overheating. This camera is going to turn itself off. And then after that, I'm going to talk about whether or not you should buy the Action 4. So I realized while I'm editing this that I didn't make it really clear. This video is not sponsored by anyone. Not sponsored by DJI, not sponsored by GoPro or Insta360 or anyone else. I'm just going to call it like it is. Something I think is missing from most of the videos that you're probably going to see today on this camera, but I'm going to support it with real world data and showing you how these things actually work, both good and bad. So with that, I'll just dive straight into it. And the first thing to know is the price has actually increased. It used to be $329 for the Action 3. It is now $399 for the Action 4. The same exact price as the GoPro Hero 11 Black after they reduced prices this past spring, permanently by the way, and also removed the requirement for the GoPro subscription. So that $399 price is equal across both of them. Now quickly looking at the camera, you'll notice they look almost identical. In fact, basically they are identical externally. You'll see a little bit of like additional writing on the lens and whatnot, but these cameras look and are pretty close to identical across the board, which is not a bad thing. It basically means that all of like your accessories and mounts and even the batteries are compatible between the two of them. That includes things like the battery performance being the same between the two cameras as well as the weight of the two cameras. Instead, we need to go under the covers to look at the minor changes that make up the Action 4. And the very first one is changing the sensor size from 1/1.7 inches down to 1/1.3 inches. And the goal here, according to DJI, is to simply improve low light performance. Does it do that? Here's an example as I'm riding along, and you can see the sun is now effectively gone. It's at sunset here, but you've got a little bit of glow still left in there. And in this case, it's very clear that the Hero 11 exposes this scene better than the Action 4. I mean, there's no doubt about that. It's definitely a better lit scene. It looks prettier, like it is what it is. Now, if we go to a night driving scenario, I've got two different night driving scenarios here. The first one is where there are no highway lights on the highway. And you can see that in this case, the Action 4 clearly exposes the scene better than the GoPro. There's no question there. Now, is it a massive amount? No, just like it wasn't a massive amount in the previous sunflower riding example. Now, if we turn the highway lights on, because we've gone from France to the Netherlands, where they leave the highway lights on at night, at 3 in the morning, that seems like a good thing to do. Obviously, the Action 4 is a little bit better exposed there than the Hero 11, but highway signs are still readable across both of these. So if I just pause real quick on this highway sign, you can read that just fine. Now, again, generally speaking, action cameras are not really suited for night usage. Someday we might get that, but today is not that day. Point there being that don't overthink the sensor size. In 2023, that's like just one tiny slice of the entire imaging pipeline, and all of these things have to be good in order to have a good end resultant that you look at, and that's the whole reason why I show you comparison footage, to get away from the hype marketing spec, because it just doesn't mean that much. And before we go to the next one, a quick note: if you are finding this useful and interesting, just whack that like button at the bottom there. It really does help with this video and the channel quite a bit. So the next new feature is actually a piece of new hardware. It's an accessory, something you have to buy extra, but it is this new Bluetooth GPS smart remote controller. What it allows you to do is three core things. The first is to go ahead and start and stop recording. So you press the button, boom, it starts recording. And you can then stop recording. You can also then switch modes by going and pressing the button once. Then it goes into photo mode. Again, pretty straightforward. And the last item is it'll go ahead and send your GPS coordinates from here into the camera and record that in the file. So it includes GPS, G-forces, your elevation, inclination, includes a bunch of different data which is now recorded in the camera itself. It's effectively doing the same thing that the GoPro Hero 11 does by itself internally with all the sensors, including GPS, but in this little external pod there. Now, I've got a separate review where I'll cover this. It won't be very long or complex, but one just kind of caveat to be aware of is that the remote control cannot turn on the Action 4 by itself. So if this camera goes to sleep, which it will in 5 minutes, then you have to go manually turn the camera on. The remote can't do that, whereas the GoPro remote can do that. Now, the next new thing, if you have the remote control, you can go into the DJI app and you can do these little stickers that you see right there. And so you can add these stickers as overlays. Again, if this was turned on while the camera was recording, you have to have this with it in order to get those stickers. It's not something built in like it is on the GoPro, but nonetheless, that does also reduce some of the battery burn firm because that GPS and stuff like that does impact battery and overheating as it does on the GoPro, which we'll talk about later on, so hang tight for that. Next, DJI said they improved the wind reduction technologies, the algorithms behind the scenes. They left the same number of microphones in the camera, so that remains the same, but they've just improved how it handles wind while you're doing something. So let's take a look at that. Here's an audio snippet. Just a quick audio test. I descend right now. I don't know how fast I'm going. I'm guessing about 45, 50 kilometers an hour, just to see what it sounds like in the wind. Just a quick audio test. I descend right now. I don't know how fast I'm going. I'm guessing about 45, 50 kilometers an hour, just to see what it sounds like in the wind. I would say this audio snippet is pretty representative across the board of all my testing with this. It's not like massively better or worse, it's just like, yeah, it's in the ballpark. Next up, they've added support for InvisiStick to anything. So in the Action 3, there was InvisiStick support, which basically allows you to take this giant 1.5 meter stick. I mean, this is a really long stick, by the way. And you put the camera on the end of it like this. And what that allows you to do then is to go ahead and remove the stick. So if I can do this right now for you, that's photo mode. So the idea being that you can actually remove this stick in post-production. So I do like this right there, and the stick will go away. In the past, that was only supported in snow sports and I think water sports or something like that. Now it's supported across the board in every sport that you want. You do have to have this giant-ass long 1.5 meter stick though, which means that it's going to depend on the scenario. Still, it's a cool option to have that mode there if you want it across all things. Next, they changed one of the color profiles that you have. So if I flip it over right here and just tap on this, you can see there's the color profile right there in Pro mode, and now there's a new D-Log M 10-bit. Now there was previously 10-bit on the Action 3, but it was desync-like. And DJI says that in this new D-Log M mode, you get a little more dynamic range of the imagery or the data that's recorded to the file to do better post-processing. Next, they've increased the waterproofing of this from 16 meters down to 18 meters. So a 2 meter increase there. And with that, they've also added a new underwater color profile. I presume though that's for like pretty blue waters. I live in the Netherlands and my waters here are just mud and brown and dark and disgusting. So I can't really test that here because it's just going to be like mud. But someday I will go somewhere with nice pretty waters and I'll be able to test that. But today is not that day. And then we got two quick geeky ones before we get into the good stuff of the comparison footage and all that. Number one is they've gone ahead and they've added a new sharpness option. So if you flip it over the back here and you go down, you'll see image adjustment. And then there's two defaults. There's default and portrait, but you can go to custom now and you can change the image sharpness and noise reduction here. So you can see there's a sliding scale right there on the side. I can go down to -2 up to +2, leave it at 0, and then the noise reduction as well. It's a custom option. The other thing they've done is they've added all of the gyro data to the files. So again, kind of matching what GoPro does, where they add all that accelerometer and gyro data so that third-party apps can go ahead and take that data and compensate for it and do post-processing of stabilization after the fact. That's something that's primarily of interest to quad or FPV flyers, where you want to maybe tweak that processing and stabilization afterwards. So now that's in the file if you want it. So let's instead talk about comparison footage, because there's a lot of footage that I've shot over the last month. I've shot hundreds of videos, but in particular, I've got like 17 core video sets that are perfectly the same across all things, and those are what I want to compare. I'm going to add a bunch of those to a Dropbox share down below here this evening, so stay tuned for that. I got a lot of footage to upload, so it's going to take a little bit of time. So the very first thing I want to talk about is stabilization and whether or not one camera is better than the other. So look at this little tidbit here, a couple tidbits while I'm mountain biking. Overall, both cameras do well. But it's very clear, absolutely clear, that GoPro is doing a better job of stabilization than the Action 4. You just see how smooth it looked. And again, across a wide variety of scenarios, not just mountain biking, but everything I've done, I've seen that the stabilization is better on the GoPro and the Hero 11. Now, for example, you can see this here. Remember that sunflower clip from earlier on? Look at the stabilization now this time as opposed to the light. And here you'll see the GoPro looks like it's on a gimbal. Like, it is unbelievably smooth. It's just like almost like an aircraft there right next to me. It's really, really smooth. And the Action 4 is not bad. It's just not quite as good. And this mirrors what we saw in the Action 3. That stabilization is good, but it's not as good as the GoPro. And the reason for that is probably pretty simple. A GoPro has more resolution to work with. If you imagine a giant big block like this as your sensor, a GoPro has 5.3K, or actually even more than that anyway, it's more than that. So in the case of the Action 4, it's got 4K, so it's a smaller little image to work with. The way electronic stabilization works is it basically takes this bigger image sensor and crops into it and moves around like this. And so the more image resolution that you have, the more ability you have to play with that. And this is true if you go into some of the specialty modes. So on the Action 4, there's a mode called horizon balancing. And the idea there is that you keep the horizon perfectly flat. GoPro has the same concept. It's called horizon lock. Here's an example where I put 2 cameras on the hood of the car and went down this twisty mountain road. Now the mountain road is obviously pretty darn flat, but it's a good example as I go around the curves. And you can see that the Action 4 does some wonky stuff here. I promise you my car is not on a crazy angle because the RV that you just saw there would have tilted over at that point. It's just not handling this super well versus the GoPro. It is very, very stable across the board and very steady on that horizon lock. Now, it's not all bad news for the Action 4. There are some things that it does better. So for example, in their field of view, they have a wider field of view, so in other words, how wide the camera lens can see, in linear mode. Linear mode is what they call D-warp, what the rest of the world calls normal mode, or basically non-fisheye mode. So comparing these two side by side, you see that little bit wider field of view on the Action 4 in linear mode or a non-fisheye mode. Likewise, you also are probably noticing right now that the GoPro looks a little bit overexposed. And these were set for the default, zero compensation levels. And it's funny, I went to a GoPro media event a couple months ago, and they said the number 2 things you should do when you turn your camera on is to 1, reduce the exposure compensation by half a stop, and to reduce the sharpness. To which I'm like, just do that for me then. If that's your big tip, that's the thing that you are supposed to do every single time you turn the camera on, then just do that for me. And you can see the effects of that where the DJI image does not look as overexposed. Now, as I showed you earlier in lower light footage though, the Action 4 is underexposed and the GoPro is spot on there. So it is what it is. And then again, another quick snippet here on just being a little bit wider as I descend down right now. You can see compare Ultra View compared to the Super View on the GoPro. And again, I could do Hyper View, but that makes it way more warped looking. It does get that extra width, but just not what I want. In this picture, you can probably not tell the difference at all unless you pause for a second and look at something and go, oh yeah, it's a tiny bit wider on the edges there. Stabilization on both cameras was perfectly fine on this descent too. And then here's one final example in lower light conditions. These are not side-by-side shots because I was afraid that the suction cup in the rain and the wind would fall off the car. So I did them back to back, but it's the same basically road and everything's the same otherwise. So it's pretty easy to compare these two. And you can see that, clarity-wise, they both look about the same. No real major differences here in this particular scenario. So let's talk about overheating. This is something that a lot of people talk about. And with the Action 3 last year, there we go, 3 last year, DJI made some huge gains in the overheating realm or lack of overheating. However, one of the things that most people overlook when they make these YouTube videos on overheating is that if you're out actually doing something outside, if you have any airflow with all of these cameras, if you even just foof these cameras, they will not overheat at all in any mode that you give it to them. And that is definitely true. In all of my real world usage of these cameras, they have never overheated while I'm moving anywhere at all. The challenge is if you're in a static environment where there's no wind at all. So for example, inside of a hot car, that's a no wind environment. Or if you're trying to film a baseball game or a football game or whatever it may be, and there's no wind around, they will overheat in the sun. And so here I did a test of this back a few weeks ago when it was a 92 or something like that degree day out. And in this case, the GoPro overheated first. You can see the exact time on the screen there, followed closely by the Action 4. And then 2+ hours later, the Insta360 Go 3 decided to overheat too. Now you may be like, whoa, how did it do that? And the thing is, it cheated basically. Number one, these cameras were in 4K mode versus the Insta360 only goes up to 2.7K, so that made it pretty easy. And then 2, the Insta360 case that you see there isn't waterproof. It's got a bunch of holes in it, literally holes in it. And as a result of that, it's got more air ventilation. So it's a little bit easier for that camera to not overheat compared to one of these cameras here. I will do more overheating tests in the fall because by then we should have probably a new GoPro, and it makes more sense to do that then. All the stuff we already know from the Action 3 is applicable to the Action 4 in terms of static overheating type scenario. Okay, so where do we stand when comparing the like-priced $399 Action 4 to the $399 Hero 11 Black? And that's a bit tricky. So last year when the Action 3 came out at $329, I noted that, it seemed to be priced appropriately. It was clearly an inferior camera to the GoPro Hero 11 Black that came out on the exact same day. And this time we've now increased the price of the Action 4, but haven't really seen major improvements. Almost all those improvements I just listed are very minor spec change type stuff. The biggest one is the addition of the remote, which you now have to pay extra for. So you got to pay for the camera plus the remote to get the GPS functionality versus GoPro has that built in. Obviously, GoPro has a remote as well that you can buy, and you have to pay extra for that. So that isn't a super compelling argument there. And the rest of those things are very minor, spec formatting stuff that only matter to a handful of people. And the people that that stuff matters to are the people that want better image quality, better resolution, better stabilization. And for all of those categories, the GoPro clearly wins. I mean, you can see that in the footage. Here's the thing. I think, to me, the Action 4 is a camera that probably shouldn't exist yet. I guess my challenge is I think the Action 4 was pushed out the door by accountants. They wanted to get to an annual release cycle like GoPro has. As true as Apple releases an iPhone every September, GoPro releases their action cameras in September as well. We're only 45 days or so away from that happening with the Hero 12. This is the Hero 11. So why would you release a subpar camera at the same price just 45 days before? There are virtually no meaningful upgrades in this camera, and now that just seems like it's rushed out the door. It would have been, in my opinion, way better to go ahead and hold the Action 4 until next spring sometime, increase the resolution, increase some of the features there, some of the ancillary features that GoPro does better, like, you know, the starlight mode and stuff like that, those sorts of things, and have a much more competitive offering for the spring and summer than to push it out the door at the last minute to try to hit a new annual release cycle. But that's just my 2 cents. This is not a bad camera, to be clear. It's just not a very competitive camera with the Hero 11 and probably not with the Hero 12 this fall either. With that, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for plenty more sports technology goodness. Have a good one.